Yo, everybody. Welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics brought to you by Sketch.com. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is the cartoonist behind the recently released graphic novel Freestyle. It's Gale Galligan. Thanks for coming on, Gale.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So we are actually recording this before the release of Freestyle, so we have to start there. How are you feeling on the approach to Freestyle's release?
Oh my gosh. Honestly, I am still a little bit in the space where it doesn't feel like it's happening. It is not a real book yet. Just because this is a book that I pitched before I got on to Babysitter's Club, in 2015. So it feels like I've been kind of working on and waiting on this one for a while. I'll be really excited to see how people respond to it when it comes out. But right now, where are we? What's happening?
I do think it's kind of interesting because when you think about Freestyle versus, your Babysitter's Club graphic novels, the former is all you with no history connected to it, while the latter are adaptations of a series that I actually was surprised. I thought Babysitter's Club was older than me, but it actually started in 1986. It's slightly younger than me in terms of age. Not that one method is good and the other is bad, but does it feel different releasing Freestyle versus one of the Babysitter's Club releases because it is all you behind it?
Yeah, 100%. Like, on the one hand, it is really exciting to say, hey, this one's all me. This is something I entirely came up with. And so I can take all the credit if you end up liking it. But there is the flip side of that, where with babysitters, there's a built-in audience. There are people who grew up loving it like me. There are kids who are already on board. And if somebody doesn't like the story, I can say, well, hey, that's Anna Martin. And also you're wrong. With this, no, it's just me.
Yeah, not to make it sound like it's a referendum or something like that, because I'm always interested to know how those things feel from the inside, because from the outside, it's like, readers have their own version. And believe me, I'm going to get to things where I'm like presuppose my emotions upon you as I read the book or things like that. I'm always interested in things like that because it seems like it would feel a little different.
Yeah, it absolutely does. It feels, and this time it's personal. That's the thing.
Well, before we get into Freestyle, I wanted to go back to the beginning for you because you had previously shared your path to comics with me for a feature on Sketch, and it is, in some ways, very typical, and in other ways, very unusual. But it all starts with drawing. I know you did that a lot as a kid in a lot of different ways, including, as you said in the write-up you did for my piece, quote-unquote, goofy Garfield-adjacent gag strips. Did you find that your love of drawing was connected to comics early on, or did the latter kind of come after you started really digging into drawing?
Yeah, I feel like my earliest drawing memories are comics related. Because, my dad was subscribed to the newspaper. Every day he'd come home with a paper. I go over going, hey, like, what's happening in the world? No, comics. I'm taking the comics page. I'm clipping all of them out. I'm saving my favorites. And I was trying to draw those things I like so much, like Garfield, The Far Side, Calvin and Hobbes. I was born in the late 80s. Like, this is the vibe. And yeah, like the first things I remember trying to draw are, the Garfield eyes or gag strips with like really one note jokes, like an apple a day keeps the doctor away as a kid, like throwing an apple at a doctor. Like I was like trying to put those together very early, the story and the drawing.
It's funny when I read your work, both this and also like mini comics you've made, like the John and John 2, and then also like even like to a certain degree, like I have your zine where it's the things, I forgot what it is, like things that you're bad at drawing or something like that. Like
Yeah.
Things that you don't enjoy drawing or something like that. But it's like a lot of your work, you can see comic strip cadences in there. Like there's like little like beats and rhythms to it. And I think that's really interesting. It's like you look at a lot of cartoonists and like, a good example is like, do you know who Akikuo Johnson is?
Yeah.
Yeah, like I loved his graphic novel, No One Else, that came out last year. And the funny thing is like as I was reading, I was like, is this a comic strip? And then I asked him about it and he's like, oh yeah, I love comic strips. Like that was a huge part of this. And I don't know. I mean, do you feel like that is something that kind of impacted without you really thinking it, like the way that you approach storytelling, where you kind of have like some of those comedic beats? Because I feel like in some ways I could see Corey Tan, the main character from Freestyle, being a comic strip character.
Oh, number one, I really appreciate that. Number two, yeah, absolutely. I don't think it's something that I've consciously thought of, that type of pacing, but the way you put it makes a lot of sense. I think that Yeah, learning pretty early on to express myself in a strip format absolutely contributed to the way I want to take a moment, let you have a joke sink in, and then here's the goof. Part of that is probably also because I grew up reading a lot of manga.
Yeah.
And the way that some of those jokes land, especially with, Rumiko Takahashi's Rama One Half, or one of my favorites was Fumi Yoshinaga, who did Antique Bakery. They will take beat panels where it's like the same thing happens twice and then you get the joke. And I always thought those were so funny and perfect and great. I definitely ate them and took them into myself.
I really just want to talk about Antique Bakery right now because I've never heard of that and I want to know what it is. Are the baked goods antiques, or how is it an antique bakery? Give me like a 1 minute synopsis. What is this?
Oh my gosh, here's my pitch for Fumi Yoshinaga's Antique Bakery. The concept is a man who hates sweets for some reason sets up a bakery in like an antique store style setup where it's very cute, very precious, like it's tea time. He hires people to sell these sweets, and it turns out he has an ulterior motive. But the manga is 4 volumes long, and it slowly starts to unfold. You get these little jokes where the characters are learning to get along because obviously why is this man here? What is he doing? But you learn about him and his mysterious past. You learn about this former wrestler who absolutely loves sweets, so wants to work in the bakery but knows nothing.
Oh my God.
And their head chef. It's very character driven. They start to learn to love each other, and you kind of solve their problems along the way. I absolutely love it. The baked goods themselves are not old. They're very edible, but I think it's fantastic.
I feel like Mr. B, the toy store owner from Freestyle, could have his own antique bakery style store or story, because I don't know, that character is just feels like a fulcrum of a lot of stories that could be happening. Just because like toys and yo-yos and things like that are such like a connecting tissue thing for kids, and like the people who come in and out of his life. Anyways, that is an aside. I just, when you were telling me about that, I was like, oh my God, Mr. B could totally be that person.
I would love that so much. Like, one of my favorite types of story is the vignette one, where you have this core concept and then just things happen every episode around that space. That would be so fun.
My wife was watching this show that was on Netflix. It was an anime series. It was, God, Kataro something. God, it was about this kid who's like 4 years old and for some reason is living by himself in like this apartment complex. And all these people are like, oh my God, why is this kid living by himself? And they're like, we need to take care of this kid. But slowly but surely it becomes apparent that this kid is helping them understand life. And it's always like he meets a different person that lives in his place. And it's really funny. Well, it's not funny. The funny thing about it is that it is in fact not funny. You watch it and you're expecting, oh my God, this 4-year-old by himself, this is gonna be filled with hijinks, but instead is like the saddest show that has ever existed. And you're like, oh my God, my heart, every single episode, Kataro, what have you done? You've changed this person's life.
Oh my gosh. That is the pitch that has sold me the most.
Oh
so I'm gonna like log off right now.
You mentioned manga, and I do think it's interesting looking at like your roots are a combination of comic strips. And, you came up during the manga boom in like the early 2000s. So you were kind of, coming up during like this. It's funny thinking about that being the manga boom, because I feel like we're, simultaneously in a manga boom right now.
Oh, yeah.
How do you feel like manga, besides those cadences we were talking about, like how do you feel like that spoke to you as someone who loved to draw and tell your own stories and helped you kind of better understand that maybe you would like to do these yourself?
Yeah. So how do I put this? The part where I realized I wanted to do it myself came a lot later, I feel, just because I was reading comics. I was admiring the people making them, but I didn't really make that career connection for a long time. Like, oh, I could do this. It was always something I did for fun. As for getting into manga and getting excited about it, a lot of that was just I think the time in which I was growing up, the manga boom, you had these books coming out like Cardcaptor Sakura, Yu-Gi-Oh, one of my big favorites, and Sailor Moon and all of that. And that was really the first time for me where I was seeing a lot of comics about younger people like me, because Smile wasn't out yet. Vera Barskool wasn't putting out books. What I had were comic strips. I had Archie. I had Tintin. That was what I happened to have access to. And so when those books, when that manga started coming out, it really did speak to me. It made me feel like I could come up with my own cool original characters like this. I started veering a little bit away from gag strips and more into autobio or original fantasy stories or stories inspired by like the games I was making up with my friends.
Yeah.
So that kind of shifted my story direction, I feel, pretty significantly.
It is interesting to think about that time because like the manga boom preceded like Scholastic graphics existing and like First Second existing, where kind of the middle grade YA market was really formalized. It is interesting to think about how different it was coming up during that time, because I think back then it was like, even if you wanted to tell your own stories in a like kind of formal capacity, really the only place you could do it was like as a webcomic almost.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. And I definitely started to get into web comics around that time as well. And yeah, that was for me what I had found was Mega Tokyo, Penny Arcade, and a few years later Johnny Wander, and that kind of just blew my mind.
Well, I'm going to skip past the animation part, despite the fact that I find that really interesting. But I do want to talk about, you mentioned about how the job became a job in your mind when, like, years down the line. That ties into the fact that before you actually pitched Scholastic, you were your pal Raina Telgemeier's production assistant on drama, which is funny because you had said before intern, and I was Googling and be like, did I understand this correctly? And finally I found Raina mentioning that you were the production assistant on drama. I'm sure you continue to learn from Raina in some ways, and I'm sure a big part of what you learned was the fact that this is in fact a job. But during that stretch, like, what do you think the biggest things you learned about making comics from Raina? Was like that in some ways your comic school? Well, I mean, before the actual formal comic school you went to?
I love that. Yeah, definitely. It was great. Basically, yeah, she put out a call for interns on her live journal. And as we proceeded, she kind of said, okay, this feels like your production assistant. This is what we are calling this now. So that was kind of that's where the fun name flip came from. But yeah, basically it turned out I lived a few blocks away from her at the time. So I would go over, I would see just the process of making comics. That was kind of the biggest how to put this, learning experience for me, was just, oh, here are the formal steps one person takes to make a comic. You're thumbnailing it, you're penciling it, you're inking it, you're taking a lot of delicate time to erase all of those pencils. That was one of my major contributions to drama. I did a lot of erasing.
Nice.
And just the entire beginning, middle, end, and I got to ask questions like, why do it like this? What's on your mind? And it was really, really useful and fascinating. Like you said, one of the big parts for me was just understanding that this was a job, and seeing the ways in which it was a job like any other job was very useful to me.
So it kind of normalized things for you.
Exactly. Yeah. Like it's not a star in the sky. It is a thing you can literally sit down and do.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's one of the things that's always interesting is like when you're sitting here and you're reading, I don't know, anything like Calvin and Hobbes, Bill Watterson. It's like Bill Watterson is just like, I mean, he like literally is like somebody that people do not understand the slightest, actually. Like, I think that is a real case. But it becomes a job that is like impossible to understand because there was like no transparency when you're a kid. But like getting in there and seeing that, I'm sure that made it feel like that, like you said, it's not a star in the sky. It's something that's achievable, and it's something that you can work towards if you really want it.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's funny you mentioned Bill Watterson, because I feel like a moment very similar to that was when I got to see his work in an exhibition, and that very last page where they're going off down the snow in their sled. You go up real close and you see so much whiteout on the page.
Right.
It was like that. It was going, oh, you didn't get it perfect the first time. You're just making a thing. Mm-hmm. Working with Raina was also a lot like that,
where you kind of understand that it's like perfection is not achieved by just not making mistakes. It's by like correcting a lot of things along the way.
Exactly. There's still room to change things and grow as you go. No script is going to be beautiful.
Do you feel like, I think it's really interesting. So you were the production assistant for Raina, and then you yourself took over the Babysitters Club series. And then on top of that, I think it's really interesting. I was reading an interview with Chan Chow, who is just absolutely incredible. And Chan was talking about how you were their role model. Like you were one of their role models in comics. And it's funny because it's like Chan took over along with Gabby Epstein as like one of the two cartoonists who followed you on the Babysitters Club. And it's kind of interesting to think that there's like this legacy of like fantastic cartoonists that come out of that franchise that are just like, you know, like, I don't know, like you're following up Raina and then like you're bringing your like A game with Freestyle and everything. And then like Chan's doing amazing stuff. It's interesting to see that. But do you feel like there's like a certain level of kinship amongst the Babysitters Club cartoonists? It's like you've all went through that, not to make it sound like it's like some sort of ordeal or something.
Oh my gosh. I mean, obviously, if one of you all hear me and disagree, feel free to shout out. But I do personally.
Yeah.
It definitely is a very unique experience, I feel, in graphic novels where there aren't that many serial graphic novel stories that are changing hands like this. So you do get to have this very specific experience where you are working with your editor and also the original Babysitters Club editor. That's a really interesting way to do things that you don't, I feel, see as often on this side of things.
Mm-hmm.
And getting to have people to share feelings with about that, or kind of share notes or say like, hey, here's the design of a house, have fun.
Oh my
it's
God.
Great. It's a little club.
I hadn't thought about that. You know, it is interesting though, because it's like Raina comes in and does, God, I don't even remember how many books Raina did.
4.
Okay, 4 books. And Raina kind of established like the look, the feel of what this should be. What does that mean for your work? Like, was it necessary for you to match Raina's work stylistically as much as possible? Or was this like, were you able to bring your own flavor to those books?
A bit of both. We did not want to scare the children with just like hey, here's a surprise, entirely new style. Get used to it. No, I did want to keep things like I wanted to keep the original character designs fairly close. I wanted to match spaces as much as possible. I did have room to insert my own flavor into it, but I did pare back some of my more over the top like styles of expression, like eyes a little bit smaller, and that's okay. I think that it was a really useful exercise, just saying, okay, so I am going to like pare back this kind of expression, but that means that I can make it really big where it counts. I got to think more mindfully about how to use what I had.
Yeah. I always think it's interesting talking to cartoonists about things like that, where if you told somebody who wasn't in comics what you had to do because of that, some people might be like, oh, that's a drag. That's like such a bummer. But I talked to like a lot of cartoonists, and they appreciate constraints. Like they appreciate having to like work within things because it kind of pushes them and makes them learn new things about their own work that they wouldn't have thought of otherwise.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. It's kind of like how one really fun piece of advice is to just draw things in ink for a while so you can't take it back. Stuff like that. It gets
the same
really
thing with
annoying,
crosswords.
but it's useful, just like crosswords.
Yes. Oh God, my mom always made me do, or not made me, but she was just like, you should do it in ink because otherwise you're gonna like, if you make a mistake, you're gonna know. Like it's good to do that. And I'm like, okay, I'm gonna do that. I'm like, this sucks.
Right. What, am I gonna frame it?
I'm trying to change this F into a P, and that's like the best options I have because it's actually like similar shape wise. But I don't know. I do think that's really interesting that like that was your path, and I also think it's funny too because it's like you were Raina's production assistant. And then you made your own comics for a bit. And then you went to SCAD. And then while there, you actually eventually pitched Scholastic on the opportunity to do Babysitters Club and Freestyle at the same time. It's interesting to think because it's like from the outside, if you didn't know those pathways that you did, you would probably assume that Raina was like the direct link into Scholastic, but it wasn't.
Yeah. And it was a real surprise. Just like, talking to Scholastic and then having them go afterwards, wait a second, you did what with Raina? Like they had no idea.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
I know. It was a really fun coincidence that I ended up just kind of like, coming home almost?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Before we get into Freestyle, I did want to talk about the mini comics and the zines that I had mentioned earlier, because I think it's really interesting. Like making comics is not easy. It's a lot of work. I'm sure, I don't know how long Freestyle took. I'm sure it took like quite a while to put that together, and even ignoring the fact that you pitched it back when you were at SCAD. But very rarely are cartoonists looking for like more work to do. But you keep making your own thing. You made like that aforementioned pair of heartfelt, wonderful John Arbuckle comics about what his life might really be like as a working cartoonist, and like that zine I mentioned, a zine of things I struggle to draw on a regular basis. Those are absolutely wonderful. Actually, John 2, I think, was the first thing of yours I had ever read. And I just remember being like, this is like the best comic I've read in forever. It is so good. But I am interested in what those shorter form or kind of just fun jaunts, just for you jaunts, like the zine I mentioned, offer you as a cartoonist. Is it just fun? Is it a change of pace when you're doing all these like longer form projects? Or do you feel like you're regularly learning from works like those?
Oh my goodness. All of the above. On my Scantron, I have filled in every bubble. I will not win this one. But yeah, it definitely is a combination of all of those things. When I was at SCAD, I was really getting into learning how to formally make comics, like expanding the way that I thought about comics, my processes, and all of the tools that worked best for me. And part of that was we were making a lot of mini comics, just 1 page, 3 pages, 4 pages, 8 pages, kind of expanding on that way. And I found that when I did that, when I made shorter comics, it was helping me to explore both myself as a cartoonist and the things that I was interested in. I could try out a different pen or a different size of paper. Like with John, it was the first time I tried making a comic on, I think it was like 5.5 by 8.5 instead of my usual 11 by 17. And I found that it felt really nice and freeing, but also hurt my hand a lot. So I don't do that for books.
Yeah.
Yeah, but stuff like that where I can figure out different techniques without committing, or express a small idea that doesn't feel like an entire book. And on the other side, making books takes a really long time. And I am a person who grew up making comics for validation. I shared them with my friends. I shared them with my family. I put them online. It's hard to do that with a book. So telling really short stories and getting to put them online to say, hey, here's a feeling I'm having, and having that more immediate response also does keep me going during the very big middle part of the book, thumbnails, pencils, where it feels like I haven't gotten anywhere in a while, and I'm starting to like hate myself. Like there's a dip. You start to feel like the book is actually bad. Having something on the side where you can say, no, I'm still okay, is very useful to the professional process.
Well, and also I imagine, I one of my favorite cartoonists is Faith Erin Hicks, and I just talked to Faith about this on the podcast, but I love that Faith still does fan art. And like, whether it's like Murderbot or it's like, God, I'm trying to remember who it was. There was like the, oh my God, I'm completely spacing the one that she did. Oh, it was Resident Evil 4. She did fan comics for Resident Evil 4. This was a long time ago, but it still is like amazing. And she does all these different things, or like just personal expressions. And I think that another thing about it too is, and not to speak for you, but it's just like, I imagine part of it too is like, sometimes you just want to draw for yourself. And like, sometimes you just want to express yourself in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, having editorial feedback is amazing, considering what would work for a specific audience or what would communicate with kids specifically is incredible. But sometimes you do want to do the absolutely weird thing on the side.
Yeah.
They're so good for that.
Have you ever found out if Jim Davis had read any of your John comics?
I have not. Oh my gosh. I remember I went to a convention a few years ago and found out that like our ships had passed in the night. Like he left right before I got there. I was just like, no.
Oh my God. Were you going to try to hand him the, hey, do you want these?
I know. I was seriously considering it. Like, should I do this? But also like, I would explode on the inside. I don't know if emotionally I could handle the concept. He is a fake person to me now. He's over there.
I mean, I imagine like to a certain degree, those comic strip people are kind of like those stars in the sky, because it's like, it is interesting to think about, modern comic creators and cartoonists and stuff. And like, they are very reachable. They're like, you can go on Instagram or you can go on Twitter or something like that. But even somebody that's still active, like when I grew up, I really loved Bloom County, even though that I realized as an adult that I understood about like 7% of the jokes because it was hyper political and I was a child.
Yes.
But Berkeley Breathed is still kind of like a character. He's not really like, he's obviously a person, but he kind of presents himself as like this character in his own universe. And it's interesting because that, I kind of feel like to a certain degree is like the comic strip creator way, where there is like some separation of reality between Jim Davis, cartoonist of Garfield, and Jim Davis, the person. I know a lot about Jim Davis, cartoonist of Garfield, nothing about the person.
That's exactly it. Yeah, that's probably the way he likes it too.
Probably, yeah, probably.
But it is funny how some cartoonists do have that boundary, and it does make them feel, just a little bit more mysterious, unreachable, and kind of like, if I met you, I would not know what to do with myself. that mindset is fascinating.
I will say that you do have a connection. Before we started recording, you mentioned Ryan North. I think he wrote an Unbeatable Squirrel Girl comic that Jim Davis did the art for. So there is always that connection. But before we move on, I just want to say I reread John 2 yesterday in preparation for this. And the scene with Lindsay, his young fan, still really hits me in the heart. It's just,
my gosh.
It does it to me every time. I have to say, and maybe we're going to get into this in a little bit. One of the things I think you really excel at as a cartoonist is finding a really good way to like blend emotions together, where it's like this, funny like idea of like John Arbuckle going to this like comic fest where he's meeting all these young people and he's never done it. And like, it could be comedic and it is amusing, but at the same time, it is like a very beautiful emotional journey. Like you're very good at balancing those things. And I don't know, like, do you feel like that's something that's just very feel based, or it's just something that you have, I don't know, like, can you build that with intent, I guess?
I would probably put it on a kind of a partial mix, where I definitely do have my internal, like, this feels right, this doesn't quite feel like it's working yet vibes. But there is an intentionality to where I'm going and thinking, okay, if I am an absolute weirdo with this, if this is an egregious concept, then people might be more like willing to just roll with it, and that lets the sincerity come across later.
Yeah.
It's a really interesting space, I guess, kind of like horror, where you're going in to like be scared, and this scaredness lets you feel something else while you're there.
Mm-hmm.
Giving you a weird concept, this is very funny, John Arbuckle being a cartoonist, lets me sidle in to say something sincere underneath that without feeling too over the top, I think.
You just gave me the opportunity to use a very unnecessary analogy here because you mentioned the word horror. I recently had the writer of Marvel's Predator comic on here, Ed Brisson, and we were talking about, as a writer, whether or not they're kind of like lines you can't cross when you're working for a franchise like that. Mm-hmm. And he said that there's no real formal like lines. It's like you don't know, but his thing was basically you like don't know where the line is until you reach it, and they're like, you can't do that. And I imagine that's kind of the same way there, where it's just like there's like a way you could have done that John story or even Freestyle where it becomes like maudlin or it becomes over the top or something like that. But knowing when you reach that line, that feel, I imagine, is something that you can't really plan for, but you know when you get there.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I guess just like tasting for salt.
Exactly. I've now filled my quota of having Predator references in this podcast, so I've nailed it. But
we did it.
We did it. And now, a word from one of our sponsors. You may have heard of Zoop, the new crowdfunding platform, and they have some amazing comic campaigns running now, including Faceless and the Family from the Eisner-nominated Matt Lesniewski, The Whistling Skull from Tony Harris and B. Clay Moore, which continues their work on JSA Files and DC Elseworlds, and the completed Saucer Country, an omnibus collecting the whole series from Paul Cornell and Ryan Kelly. Better yet, with Zoop, there are no buggy add-on pages and surveys after the fact. You simply throw rewards and add-ons into your account and check out. Head to zoop.gg to support the live campaigns and sign up for launch alerts for what's next. Also, Zoop is taking submissions, so creators, reach out at hello@wearezoop.com to learn more. And now, back to the show. Well, let's get into Freestyle. It's your new middle grade graphic novel with colors from K-Chap. Here is a quick breakdown Built off of the solicit for the book. The solicit is very long, so I'm shortening it a little bit.
Please do.
It's about Corey Tan, an 8th grader that's part of a long-standing breakdance crew, 8 Bits, that's getting ready for a major competition. But when his grades slip and he ends up meeting a new friend and finding a new passion, he struggles to balance the expectations of his parents, school, his dance crew, and his new friend. Much drama, comedy, and superb cartooning ensues. I already mentioned this before we started recording. I love Freestyle. It is fantastic. It took me on a real tour of emotions because, I mean, that's what you do, Gale. You're very good at it. But I also loved it as a former kid that wanted to both breakdance and to be good at throwing yo-yos. I was bad. I was so bad at both. I was just so bad. But also as an adult that just wants more sports comics. And I kind of feel like this is in the parameters of sports comics. Let's start with the breaking and yo-yoing of it all. Do you have any personal breakdancing and or yo-yo related background, or did they just feel like ideal fits for this story?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So the answer is yes and yes, but also no pretensions here. I am very bad at both. This is a vicarious living story for sure. Basically, I went to SCAD for my master's, but before that, like we kind of briefly discussed, I went to NYU for animation.
Yeah.
So when I moved to the city, I started seeing B-boys and B-girls all around. I was fascinated. I loved the expression, the creativity, the vibes. I signed up for classes, and listen, I can do a sweet turtle freeze, but it hurts. Yeah, so I just honestly I love watching those competitions. I think it's so great. And then a few years later, I kind of similarly just stumbled across a yo-yo video online, as one does. And I realized how much things had changed since we were kids. Like this was a full-on international competition where you perform with a yo-yo to music. You have this whole set that you put together over a few minutes, and you are landing your yo-yo on the string in time to the beat. You're sending it around your entire body, head, back, behind your legs. It's like a dance. You get it. You get it.
Yeah.
So kind of I was fascinated. I was inspired. I watched many videos. I bought yo-yo. Again, I'm bad, but those things were definitely in my mind as I was starting to think, what kind of story am I interested in telling for myself?
Mm-hmm.
And the answer to that was basically you mentioned sports stories. I love sports manga. I love Prince of Tennis. I love Haikyuu, and I also love corny dance movies. I love Step Up. I love High School Musical. All of these things. What I basically said, I like a lot of things. I want to mush them together. I want to tell a story about how much people can like things and how much that can bring them joy as they come together and share it with other people. It's a very heartfelt story for being about a b-boy who gets into yo-yo.
I think the thing that I really didn't understand before going into this is, so when I was a kid, I was one of those kids who, I don't even know where you do it. You just like send money to a place and then they send you a yo-yo back with this like brief brochure that's terrible that like vaguely explains everything. And all of a sudden I want to be like, doing the Eiffel Tower and walking the dog and doing all these different things, but I'm terrible at all of them. And I got pretty into it. I remember, God, what is the phrase for like the type of yo-yo that Corey got after he went to Mr. B's place? There's like a type of...
God, you picked up an unresponsive yo-yo.
Unresponsive. Yeah, I remember that. I remember being like, why would I want an unresponsive one? I don't want to not respond to me. This is illogical. And I remember getting one of those and I was like, this is so different. This is crazy. But I never knew that there was like the rhythmic element to it, that there was like these routines and everything like that. I'm actually kind of scared about YouTubing this because I know that this will like become a rabbit hole for me, and it'll be a very, like, my wife will be like, what did you do today? I'm like, I watched 9 consecutive hours of yo-yo YouTube videos. Nobody wants that.
One of us.
You actually went to the New York Yo-Yo Club though.
I did. Oh my gosh. Basically I again, fascinated by yo-yo, very bad in person. As it turns out, video tutorials are not always my jam.
Sure.
But I did some Googling around and found out that there is a club in the city that meets on Sundays. If it's a nice day, they'll meet in a park. If it's not, they'll meet in a public space indoors. And I had no idea what to expect. I am a cartoonist. I am very shy. but I said for yo-yo, I will try this thing. So I walk in with my yo-yo, and it's just a group of really chill people who are excited to share their craft. They were exchanging notes. They were comparing different yo-yos, because one of the cool things about yo-yo is they make a lot of different kinds with cool colors. They're just like, look at this like beautiful rainbow mod. Like, what are you doing? Anyway, so I was chatting with this really friendly older guy and said, hey, I'm having trouble with the trapeze. Like I keep trying, it's not working out for me. He loaned me a yo-yo, like this slightly wider yo-yo. He said it'll be easier to land on the string. Just give it a shot. Put your finger out like this. Try the thing. And after a few tries, I did start to get the hang of it. And yeah, I was so delighted. I went back afterwards. Hey, here's your yo-yo back. He said, no, just keep it. And that made a huge impression on me personally. And that was definitely something I wanted to bring into the book as well, that feeling of community.
I think that one of the really cool things about both this book and also like modern times is that, you know, the book is about, in a lot of ways, like embracing your passions and feeling free to, like, if like your passions change, it doesn't make you dislike your past necessarily or the people that came from it. It just means that I'm trying to remember, there's this one line Corey has where it's just like, I'm making a new friend to like one of his dance crew. It's like, I'm not like leaving you or something like that. And like, you know, I love that theme of it, but I also love the fact that like in current times, in theory, it's like when I said earlier, like when I was a kid, like I had to mail away for this thing and hope that I understood this really like cryptic notebook that explained yo-yo tricks. And if I didn't understand it, I was kind of out of luck. Now it's like, you have like YouTube, you have like the ability to find groups online. Like, you know, I wouldn't have no idea where to find the New York Yo-Yo Club. You can find groups like that. They can help you better understand that. I love that this is a book about embracing your passions where, you know, during a time where I feel like it's maybe easier than ever to embrace those passions if you really want to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've definitely done this in my life where like when you adopt a rabbit, you find out that rabbits are actually super complicated. There are rabbit subreddits. There are rabbit discords. You can go in and say, hey, my rabbit's doing a thing. What's up? And you will get 50 different useful responses, as well as join a community that just posts rabbit pictures. Like, that's incredible. The internet is chaotic and sometimes horrible, but there are very good things about it too.
You're blowing my mind with this rabbit Discord. I should know that this exists because I'm a person of the internet, but at the same time, every time I hear a thing, it's just like the words rabbit and Discord. I just never expected to hear, but it makes sense.
Right? I feel the exact same way about every niche thing, honestly.
I sometimes I feel like I don't have enough deep cuts in my life. I'm very like high level cuts. I got a lot of high level cuts. I got to go deeper sometime. Maybe I'm gonna have to find my own rabbit Discord. Even though rabbit Discord, I don't feel like that's that deep of a cut. People love rabbits.
They do at that. Yeah. Hey, if I can recommend a deep cut for you, there is a cheese magazine called Culture. Get it? Because you culture the cheese.
Yeah.
And every article is an actual treat. You can learn how to grill cheese better. You can learn about the history of cheddaring. It's delightful.
The history of cheddaring. I didn't even know cheddaring was a thing that you could do. Oh my God. This is a rabbit hole we can't go down. We're going to go down a cheese path that's just can't happen. But, you know, actually, I wanted to compliment you about something in the book. I feel like I'm not going to say Freestyle is like a tutorial to how to do yo-yo tricks. But I will say that one thing that's fun, I feel like when Sun is teaching Corey how to do some early yo-yo tricks, I feel like there are going to be some kids who read this book that learn how to do yo-yo tricks and then get into it because of it. And like, because you really could just follow Sun's instructions and be like, oh, I can do this now.
I really appreciate that. Yeah, I definitely wanted to. One of my goals going in was to make yo-yo feel accessible. Like, I didn't want to do any information overloads. And that's a great thing about having an editor, because I definitely did start off strong. We pared back. But what I included, I wanted to be sure was readable and did make you think, okay, I could go out and find more information about this thing that seems like I could get into.
Mm-hmm. I read that when this first, like before you pitched Scholastic, that in your head, this was more of like a YA series. How do you feel like, you know, Scholastic's feedback changed the path for this book? Like, do you feel like without that engagement that Freestyle would have been a considerably different story?
Yeah. And honestly, part of that is timing where basically, again, I was coming up with this story in the beginning in 2015, where my concept of the book market was markedly different. Like, I was a huge fan of what First Second was putting out. I was a huge fan of what Oni was putting out. And so those were kind of my benchmarks where it's like, okay, like, how do I make my personal Scott Pilgrim? And a lot of those books felt more YA. Middle grade was not as solidified as a concept in my mind. So when I met with Scholastic and talked with them, one of the things that came up was basically, hey, like, it feels like at the core of this story is a kid who is learning to understand himself. It's kind of a coming age. That is a fairly middle grade concept. What about this makes you say, I want to do this as a YA with older kids? And I couldn't quite answer that. So I really went back and said, hey, what do I feel like this story is at its core? Which is funny because that's something I was doing with the Babysitters Club later, is just like figuring out, hey, like, what is this story? How do I build off of that? And so for me, the answer was, yeah, it's a story about this kid. It's a story about expectations, and it's a story about learning to be a good friend. That's middle grade. I can do a middle grade book. If I had sold it as a YA in 2015, I would not have had 4 babysitters under my belt. I don't think it would have been as strong a story for that reason alone.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting because I knew that it was an idea you had back when you pitched Babysitters Club, and it was one that you pitched to them. I didn't know that you were already kind of developing it in such a way, like where it was kind of shifting from your original idea to something else in the process. So this current form of it really has been kind of percolating in your brain for like 7 years.
Yeah. I feel like maybe even slightly longer, because I feel like I had a Corey character in my sketchbook who was a b-boy with no other information. I like, this is my OC style in like 2012, where I was definitely just grabbing pieces of things I was interested in slowly but surely and building like the world's slowest Lego tower out of them.
So it's a Lego tower that I would build because I'm like the world's worst Lego person. It's funny. I'm married to an architect and I can't build Lego to save my life. Not that those are the same thing, but at the same time, I did want to talk about the cast though, because the main trio, the 3 characters we really get perspective from are Corey, Sana, and Tess. And while there's a bit of a hierarchy to those characters in terms of, how main they truly are. Like, Corey is the main character, but we get perspectives from all of them. One of the things I think that is really great about how you handle it is there's a version of the story where Tess in particular could be the outright, like, quote unquote villain, like the one that like everyone kind of rails against or something like that. If only because but it doesn't happen if only because you helped us understand where they're all coming from in their journeys. And I think it also helps people understand that, like, in situations like the one that these varying kids find themselves in, there's no one right answer because everyone has like important parts of their own story. Like, I guess going back to that, like, why was it important to you to have not just Corey as a perspective, but multiple perspectives for this story?
Part of what I wanted to do with this story was talk about the different ways in which expectations are both placed on us and we place them on ourselves. And having multiple ways in which to do that would make it feel a little bit less, this is the one way you can do something ever. Like, if I want to do a story about a kid who has parents with big expectations and I only show the story of that one kid, then it starts to feel a little bit one note, like there's only one type of parent, just in the way that I'm trying to tell that story. So being able to do a counterbalance, like, look at this kid who's dealing with her personal feeling that she has to do this or she's a bad choreographer, as opposed to this kid who's trying to figure out how to balance expectations of his different friend groups, and that's more external. I thought that showing their different struggles with similar things that were being expressed differently would feel more whole and balanced, and hopefully more, how do I put this? Not quite interesting, but maybe slightly realistic.
Mm-hmm.
I did, like you said, I really wanted to feel sure that we got a sense for why everybody was doing what they did and not necessarily judge them for it.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense too, because I like the way that you positioned it in terms of like the dance crew too, because when you look at it, is there 8 members? It makes sense
Yeah,
given the
yeah.
fact it's 8 bits.
The
Um,
eight.
but there's in terms of, I mean, I'm speaking about breakdancing as if I really have any idea what I'm talking about. But in terms of breakdancing, I imagine there's like really 2 poles. There's like the extreme order pole, which Tess lives on, where it's like everything has to be choreographed. There's no improvisation. When you do that, that's introducing a chance to fail. Versus Corey, where it's like pure chaos. And I like the fact that like 2 of your primary perspective characters live on those poles, because that's where the natural tension is going to take place.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like it's definitely a tension that occurs in people's lives too, whether or not they do dance.
Yeah.
Where it's just, okay, like how aggressively do I schedule out my life right now? How much room do I allow for that chance meeting? And there has to be a balance, right? I feel like I guess part of my hope is that for this audience, these tweens, they can see these characters and think, okay, maybe I should do a little improv sometimes.
Yeah. Or maybe I should have some order in my life.
Like go to sleep. Go to sleep at 8. I don't know when you go to sleep.
I will give you credit. It's there's also a version of this where you're very how do you do fellow kids when you're approaching this story. But I feel like you did a really good job of incorporating how young people operate into the book, both in like the group text threads throughout, which I think you handled really well. But also, I love that the book starts with the entire 8-bit squad just like roasting Tess for like printing out the event page for the dance competition. It is such like a weirdly old person thing to do, and also something that I could absolutely see myself or my wife doing. That I loved it. Like the thing that works really well about it is it was well done in a way that makes it, I think, a little bit more relatable for younger readers, but it also helps you feel like you better understand these characters, because like it's a big cast and they don't necessarily all get time, but I feel like the text threads and stuff gives you a little bit of feel of personality that you wouldn't necessarily get otherwise.
There was literally a draft version of the story that just like, introduced every character with the character captions and then like rolled directly into and we're going to go to a competition, like just set up like less character. And yeah, you're right. It did not feel as compelling. Like going back, revising, I wanted to get more of a sense for who these kids were from day one. And a lot of that was just my experience reading really good comics that did that really well.
Yeah.
And just figuring out how to take that for myself. Like one reason I love Ngozi Ukazu's Check Please so much is because she does so much with these characters who you're only going to see every now and again. Just even having a sense of here is this person's quirk and they will do this sometimes gets you a sense of who they are outside of that too.
Yeah. And what a cast. Everyone, read Check Please. It's the best. Sports comic.
There's my rec.
Even better. Yeah. I do want to say the most relatable moment in the entire book was how terribly Corey spelled yo-yo competition in his online search. I love that you both showed that and also butchered it in the way that almost every person does when they type it out on their phone. It was hilarious. I was just like, oh my God, I have definitely done that before.
Me too. My thumbs are just too big. I cannot.
I mean, there's just like so many extra letters, but you still press search anyways because you're like, Google's going to get it. Whatever. I don't care.
I know, like you'll fix it for me, Dad. Let's go.
Yeah, exactly. I do also want to say you handled other generations well as well, because there's 2 standouts in it. One, there's a restaurant scene in the book that I absolutely love that I'm not going to get into because it's important. But I will say that as much as it says things about the main cast and how they engage with each other, and it's super lovely, there's also this profoundly unhappy older person that's sitting like directly beneath them on the page. And they're just so annoyed about how loud these kids are being. It is incredible. The other thing is, as I told you, I was writing lots of notes about this book when I was reading it. And the most notes I had might have been related to Alice Chan, Corey's mom. Here are 2 examples. These are literally what I wrote down. Mom pinching and zooming equals brilliant. And then evil face from mom saying Corey will be a very good student equals Junji Ito-ish. I just want to say, Alice Tan, masterpiece. Just incredible. This is where I presuppose my emotions on you. You seem to really enjoy drawing her varying emotional states a lot.
I do. Thank you. I feel like, gosh, we have such a concept of parents just like as a monolith, that it is really fun just to push that, like, here's the specter of parent, like be scared of Junji Ito mom.
Yeah.
But then also like letting that, be a little bit more nuanced and emotional later. Like you get both sides. It's really fun to play around with that.
I do think it's interesting. I actually only kind of realized this as we were talking about it. I kind of feel like she gets more realistic in your depiction as the story progresses. And I don't know if that's intentional or if that's just me being like weird about it.
No, I think you might be right. Yeah, and part of that is because probably because I wanted to set up that parent conflict pretty early, right?
Right.
So of course, Corey is going to perceive his, stressful grades, like wanting grounding parents as the bigger than life scary people. But as he gets into these other troubles, maybe he sees them more as people who could talk to him.
Yeah.
Yeah, that might be part of it. I don't think I was thinking about it consciously, but maybe that's where it came from.
Well, yeah, and it'll probably to some degree originates from the fact that it's like if you're doing intense zooms as somebody is like pinching and zooming on something, or if you're making like these intense faces and it's this like very serious scene about like how this family is engaging, like tonally it might cause some dissonance in the brain of the reader where like they don't know why it's wrong, but it just feels wrong. And like it works really well.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And thank you.
I actually I'm going to compliment you for one more thing related to this. It ties into the realism. I really like your establishing shots of settings. Like you have a lot of these throughout where like I think like the very first shot, I'm opening the book right now. Yeah, it's like of this park where the kids are like doing their routine practice and everything like that. There's all these shots of settings that are typically silent and it just life is going on. They do a really wonderful job of setting the location, but also like changing the pace. Like I just really love how like there'll be like a break in scenes and then you'll like have this like setting shot that just shows you where you're at, shows you what you're dealing with, and then you're off. That was, like I said, a common inclusion. What is it that you like about those? Like, what do you feel like those bring to the story for you?
Gosh, yeah. So I drew, I might have been thinking about this book for a while, but I drew it in 2020.
Oh boy.
So I was
dreaming of outside.
I missed outside. I was pregnant and I missed the city. So a lot of that was just me saying, I want to draw this place. I miss this. I love this. Let me give it a really big, beautiful spread. Part of that was my personal indulgence. Part of it is I do really love taking time to establish the space. I feel that it really helps you feel grounded in a comic when you take a moment to go, like, even if we're not going to draw this in every panel, here we are. Remember that we are in this place that has its own character as well. And part of that is, listen, I know it's a very frenetic book. There are 8 people. They've all got their own stuff going on. I need to give you a breather or we will all simply die.
It actually, I mean, not that saying he's the only one that does this, but it kind of reminded me, I feel like Kazu Kibuishi is very good at this, where he'll have like these kind of like breaks where it's not necessarily an environmental shot. Sometimes like one that comes to my mind is I think it's in the first volume of Amulet, and it's like when the house first starts walking and it changes the pace so it's a little bit less frenetic, but also it gives him this opportunity to draw things in a slightly different way than it was or than he has been throughout. And I don't know, I really like how you use that because it really does change the pace and it just looks really good.
I love that you brought up Kazu as well, because you're right. He does do that so well. And I feel like it establishes just the scale of the story so well. Like you really do get a moment to pull back and go, oh, wow, here we are. So if I got to do a bit of that, I am delighted.
Well, what's your process for a book like this? Are you incorporating art into it from the very start, or do you start with like a script of some variety?
Yeah. So, some people jump right into thumbnail drawing. My brain was not built for that. I grew up, drawing my own comics, but also grew up writing fan fiction. So I think that I do process things in words first a little bit more easily. So I will write it out as an outline, especially when I'm working on a book, because that's something that I can share really easily with editorial and fix stuff before, I have to draw all of it. Drawing is hard. So outline first, it's maybe like 2 pages tops, just here's what happens, here's what happens, here's what happens, let's go. After that, I'll break it into a full-on script. I'm breaking stuff down into how many panels I think will be on a page. I'm breaking into pages. I'm talking to myself like, hey, sorry in advance, this is going to be annoying. But once I have all of that scripted out for myself, I'm not showing the script to anybody, then I'll move ahead and thumbnail it. And often I'll realize that, what I wrote doesn't actually work. I'll break my script down further, break a one page into two, just until the pacing feels a bit more right. So there definitely is some back and forth that's still happening between past me and current me.
Yeah.
But from there, it's a pretty standard go to pencils, go to inks, send it off to the amazing colorist K-Chap, look at book, admire book.
And now, a word from one of our sponsors. Can you stop Bad Idea? That's what they're asking everyone, and I'm begging you to do in their current Kickstarter. It's for a bevy of releases led by David Lapham and Matt Kintz, The Hero Trade, one of Bad Idea's titles featuring two of the best talents in comics in a wide variety of packages for the superfans out there. Each backer helps reach an extreme stretch goal that would excite the opponents of Bad Idea, as every dollar gets us closer to $2.6 million. A final number that would result in Bad Idea stopping operations for good. Can you do it? Can you please stop Bad Idea? Back them on the Stop Bad Idea Kickstarter to do just that. And now, back to the show. It is interesting, like one thing that I guess I hadn't thought of, because I talk to a lot of cartoonists who always are like thinking about thumbnails and stuff throughout. But one of the difficult things is like, let's say you send this outline and you have thumbnails and you've spent all this time drawing and like really committing to like what your vision is for this. If the outline changes, then all of that drawing is for naught. And like I imagine that's a difficult thing where it's like, okay, well, you need to rearrange this, and you need to change this, maybe this scene needs to go. And then like all of a sudden, like you kind of almost committed double the work to it before you'd gotten like the very idea kind of blessed, if you will.
Yeah, it does get complicated. And, not everything's going to be an entirely straight shot. You'll realize halfway through that something would work way better if you did an entirely different thing. And the great thing is that you can still have conversations about that. It might be extra work, but the work will be worth it. Mm-hmm. Hopefully. I have gotten myself into trouble before, though. Recently, I had this outline that I had pitched again in 2015. Scholastic bought 2 original books from me when they bought their first 2 babysitters. Mm-hmm. And that book that I sold them that wasn't Freestyle was a middle grade fantasy. And when I went back to revisit it this year, I said, oh man, like, I like this, but I have other ideas now. I feel like I could do this better. And also it's going to be a completely different story. So I rewrote that outline completely, sent it back. We had a back and forth. I said, all right, this is perfect. I love it. And then I went to script it, and it turned out to be like 400 pages long. And that's too many. Like it's never going to be perfect. That one's on the back burner for a minute. I'm going to fix it. It's going to be beautiful. But this is part of the process. No star in the sky, only job.
Yeah. Also, I do want to point out that when listeners do read this, do not skip the bonus comics at the back, because you will learn a little bit. One other step in the process, which apparently is photo reference. 1 step. 2, embarrassing yourself doing photo reference when your husband walks in on you.
Yes, like I love working from home. It's the best. I can take so many more funny selfies, but he is there. He does walk in. I'm doing like this dramatic shonen pose holding up a yo-yo, and he's just like, what is this? Who are we? I'm like, don't look at me. Something
I've always wanted to do for my site, Sketched, is a photo reference versus like actual final combination. Because like, do you know there's a artist named Paulo Rivera?
Yes, with the muscles, right?
Well, he's very good at doing photo reference, and like he shares. I'm trying to remember. It's like Wacky Reference Wednesdays, I think it is, and he'll share these posts where it's like him like doing crazy. Listeners can't see this, but I'm trying to do a Spider-Man pose. Instead, it looks like I'm a weird surfer. But anyways, he'll do like these crazy like Spider-Man poses or whatever, and then it'll be compared to like his final piece, and like the athleticism it sometimes takes to do some of these poses is kind of crazy. Like I look at it and I'm like, I would tear muscles if I tried to do anything Paulo did.
I know. Oh my And then just like having to like finicky, like get your camera in the background, like, okay, fit my whole body. And now I'm just doing a twist. Oh, this hurts. How are the characters doing it? It's horrible. But I love that concept. I know that Carrie Peach, who does the Adventure Zone graphic novels, like every now and then she'll tweet like a comparison shot of a wacky expression, and they're always so perfect and good. I would love to see how everybody else does it too.
I think, I know the Helioscope studios crew in Portland. Like one of the things I like seeing is like every once in a while you'll see that one of them will get like two or three of the other ones to like team up for a combination photo reference. And so it's like having teammates can sometimes be nice in that case.
Yeah.
It's like you need to find like really flexible athletic artists to work with so you can have like a wide variety of photo reference options. Not that you can be like on like the application to the studio, like, are you flexible? That'd be a really weird question to have on there. But
have you considered yoga? Have you ever punched somebody? Like,
one thing I wanted to bring up involved in this is obviously like breakdance and yo-yo are highly physical, highly energetic things, and that's often difficult. Like it's by nature, comics are a art form without the traditional idea of motion. It's not like animation where it's like you actually can show the motion. With this, like you can show the before and after and you can convey that. But one thing I really liked about this, like the way you did this, is how you would use like montages and double page spreads or even like the yo-yo string itself to bring the energy of those activities to the stories themselves. There were three parts in particular that I liked in this regard. The Corey's training montage, if you will, where it's like calendar days and showing all the stuff he does and all the different things he's doing like that. I immediately like almost had like the Rocky theme playing in my head where he's like, this is building him up and trying to become the next version of Corey because he's motivated because he loves yo-yo. There's also the double page spread of Corey experiencing yo-yo YouTube for the first time, which is very manga and I really liked it. And then lastly, there's this one sequence where Sana is using a yo-yo string or is throwing the yo-yo and you use the string to cut memories into the page during one stretch. And it's really, really, really impactful. From a formal standpoint, not just from like the energy standpoint, from a formal standpoint, was it a goal of yours to try and incorporate those activities into layouts as much as possible?
Yeah, absolutely. Gosh, because I feel like, as someone with an animation training background, I definitely do think of things and how I could portray motion. One part that really stuck with me was the concept of key poses, where basically people who aren't animating like one shot at a time in sequence are animating key poses first, where they'll draw the moment that they feel is the most impactful, that communicates that pose, that gesture the most, and then build up all around that, drawing in between poses to get you to that point. So part of the way I thought about this was, how can I draw those key poses? But another was thinking, how can I use those key poses to keep moving your eye through the page? Like, is there a way I could position the camera or the character where maybe their leg will move you in another direction? How do I add all of those parts together to keep you feeling like you yourself are maybe moving a bit? And that's kind of like me being very pretentious about it. But it's a fun thought exercise, and finding ways to break it up with the string, with the calendars, and keep you, how do I put this? Like, I'm drawing a lot of dancing, a lot of yo-yos, and if I can find ways to keep that feeling fresh throughout the book, that is also useful.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you repeat the same shot over and over, it's going to lose energy.
Exactly, yeah.
It's funny, when I was thinking about it, not, again, I'm presupposing you into the story, but there's the part, I don't want to get too much into it, but there's a story about Sana's notebook, and like it reflects how she thinks about yo-yo throwing. And I kind of felt like as I was reading it, there was like a certain amount of you in there, because it seems like as I was reading the book that you were regularly trying to think of new ways you can approach this, where you're trying to push your storytelling in comics in interesting new ways without repeating the same beats too often. It felt like that in that very specific way, you and Sana had a lot of overlap together.
Aw. I can see that, and that means a lot. Thanks. But yeah, it's definitely true. And part of that is probably coming off of Babysitters, which does have its own specific structure. Just going, hey, I'll do whatever, and whatever means literally I'm gonna like try to go as hard as I can.
Yeah.
That was also part of the goal of this book, I think.
Well, and also it's like I think a common refrain when it comes to stories told for younger readers is that you can't assume that they just want to read anything or something like that. You have to respect them as readers. And it's like they're going to notice if like you're not bringing your all. And so it's like you got to keep pushing yourself because I don't know, they're adept readers. Like a lot of kids read way more than adults do actually.
Oh, 100%. Kids are the absolute best. Number one, because they are honest and it's horrible. It's like, oh, I don't want to read that. But number two, they do fully invest themselves in books that they are interested in. They'll notice stuff that you never would have thought of. Like, gosh, I was working on Boy Crazy Stacy, which is a story where Stacy goes to the beach with Marianne for babysitting, right? This was set in Jersey. I drew the most beautiful sunset because it was romantic, like romantic moment on the beach. Sun is going down. This is gorgeous. And then got a note back from Braden Lamb, the incredible colorist who noticed these things, going, so if they're in this part of Jersey, that literally isn't possible. That sunset cannot happen. Are we good?
Oh, because it sunsets in the west.
Exactly. I was like, oh, I don't look at maps. Oh no. So I just said, like, you know what? Okay, this is a book for kids. We are going to suspend disbelief. I have committed myself to these sunsets. Let's just go. And then, well, guess what fan letter I get when the book comes out?
Oh my God.
I know. I was delighted. Like, thank you for taking the time to read this book. I am going to, like, can I ask your address? Can I send you a different book? Thank you.
That is incredible.
I love kid readers for that reason. They're amazing.
So the person wrote you up and was just like, this is not possible.
And you're like, as someone who's been to New Jersey, you know that the sun doesn't set there, right? It's like,
oh my God, that is incredible.
You are 10 years old.
The honesty thing is very real though, because it's like most adults would just be like, I'm just going to let this fly because actually, excuse me, we're in 2022. I don't know if most adults would let it fly, but at the same time, I feel like kids are uniquely honest when it comes to those things. It's where you like notice something like that. It's like, excuse me, this person was left-hand dominant previously and now they're right-hand dominant. Like, how did you notice that?
I know, right? It's like you can't even be mad. Like, it's
impressive.
Did it. Thank you, child. Yeah.
I do like the idea of the key poses though, because like there are very specific, there are like some postures you have like for breakdancing in specific that anybody who has ever watched a dance movie, who I will admit, I am also a fan of dance movies because I mean, it's amazing, like physical marvels to be honest, but there are some stances that just are quintessentially like breakdance stances, and you do a very good job with those. Last compliment, I swear to God, I've complimented you too much in this podcast.
Validate me.
There is this one part where the toy store owner says, "Oh kid," as he stands in front of the wall of yo-yos, because it's this moment where Corey first gets a taste of how big this world is. It is so good. Like you talked about how like the New York Yo-Yo Club, where it's like you're learning all about like how big this world really is. That is something that I think is really important because you need to convey that this is much bigger than Corey really realized. I feel like you have a very unique talent when it comes to delivering a real sense of the moment. Like you feel like that because it was like this, you had this shot from Mr. B a little under, so it shows all the yo-yos behind him. I think that that's like really tricky to do, but is that something you like to do, like that you actively look to do, like to give certain beats this sort of this changes things feel?
100%. It's one of my favorite things, honestly. Like when I'm planning out layouts, when I'm trying to figure out how things are going to move along on a page, I am actively thinking about like the balance of it, like how many panels are zoomed in, when can we pull away or zoom in for more effect. Those beats do end up being a lot about contrast, I think. Like if you have a bunch of very small panels all together and then take the moment to make it big and pull out, it's going to feel a lot different than if you have just like a lot of the same thing all together. So for a moment, like with Mr. B, I think what I was trying to do was really just like, yeah, have that conversation, close in on the characters a little bit, have pretty regular camera angles so that I could then mix it up, look at him, pull all the way out and say, hey, look at all these exciting yo-yos. And then I had to draw all of them and it was the worst. Circles, no thanks.
It's a great idea until you have to execute it. And then you're just like, what have I done to myself?
5 horses, no.
Crowd scene of horses, exactly. Every person's dream, every artist's dream.
Or just call Tony Cliff like you do that, yeah.
Did you find that a lot of artists were talking about your zine that you made, about the things that you like have to draw on a regular basis that you don't really enjoy drawing? Because I feel like that is a very common thing where, like, there's the common ones like horses. Nobody likes drawing horses. Cars, like, unless you're like, I can think of like 3 artists who like drawing cars. Everyone else hates it. Crowd scenes, that doesn't even count because that's just work.
Right.
But I feel like everyone's got that additional wrinkle where it's like, maybe I don't like drawing, I don't know, bookcases because then I have to like fill in all those things or something like that. I feel like a lot of artists probably read that and were just like, oh my God, I know this feel.
Oh yeah, especially yeah, when you get to share something like that on social media, like you do get a lot of people going, "Oh my gosh, have we talked about shoes?" And it's the best. Everybody can be mad at shoes. I feel like there definitely is a common thread for a lot of these, and it is a thing that everybody has seen and everybody understands that is also hard to draw, so everybody knows when it looks wrong.
Right.
That's the worst.
That's true. It is funny, like the horses in particular, though. I don't know what it is, but like sometimes I even see pictures of horses. I'm like, I don't know if this horse's face is right.
Are you a horse? Yeah, I still remember. I was in a random space once with just like a magazine laid out, and it was a magazine with a fascinating photo shoot of animals from below. Like they were standing on a large glass platform, and the photos were directly from below. There were horses, and it looked so wrong. It was horrible. Just like horse stomach, horse feet. You're looking directly up at it.
That's
I
weird.
never considered this as a concept, and I hate it to this day.
What magazine was that? This wasn't that cheese magazine, was it?
No, it was not. Oh my gosh. I wish I could remember so I could simply just say never come into my life, but it's out there. I'm sorry.
Oh my God. That's crazy. Okay. Just a couple more questions. I didn't want to bring up K-Chap coloring. Incredible stuff. They did amazing work in there. How do you feel they brought the best out in your art?
Listen, coloring is magic to me. I think genuinely just the way that they approached my lines where, how do I put this? They chose the most beautifully expressive palettes. Like they knew when to pare it down or when to punch it up. Like those spreads, especially at the end, like you mentioned with the yo-yo memory string moment, just like the way that they put all of that together to say, hey, this is a moment where I want you to feel something, really made a huge difference to me. I think, yeah, it is kind of like I was talking about with the beats and balance. They know exactly when to bring in that like big, beautiful, like we have all the colors in the box, let's go moments. And I just love that so much. Like it was really interesting because, you know, as a cartoonist, I feel like I have these concepts of how I see them, like how I feel like they are going to be in the end. And they would always come back looking entirely different from that, but also so much better. And that's something that I love about collaboration.
Yeah.
I don't know how they do it, but they killed it. And I would highly recommend that you seek out K-Chap and literally everything they have ever drawn. Because they are an incredible cartoonist in their own right, and I feel very lucky to have worked with them.
Did they work on the Owl House? Because I was kind of getting that impression when I was like on their Twitter. I don't know what it was. Maybe they're just a fan of it. Because
maybe.
My niece, I don't know if you watched the Owl House, but when my niece and nephew were visiting recently, they're like, you got to watch this. And I sat down and I was like so absorbed by it. Of course, I was watching like the final like 5 episodes of the 2nd season, and that was my entryway. I'm like, this is so intense. Like, oh my God. Like,
yes.
It was blowing my mind.
I love it so much.
It's really great. But the last question I had is, you had done this previously where on Twitter you had a breakdown of your cover process.
Yeah.
And you walk through how, you know, you look at the cover to Freestyle and you see it and you think like, of course, this is the answer. This is the way that this is what the answer had to be the whole time. But in reality, I think it was like a 3-month process that involved multiple people being involved and giving feedback and all this different stuff. There are varying perspectives that go into it. It does bring up something that I think is interesting for something like Scholastic is like, K-Chap is credited as the colorist, but like production, lettering, all these different things that go into it. How much behind the scenes teamwork was there present throughout the creation of the book? Were there a lot of secret teammates on Freestyle that helped make it what it was?
Oh my gosh, I love that. Yeah, so let's see. Yeah, I was basically responsible for drawing all the things, lettering all the things.
Oh, you lettered it.
I did. However, John Green did make a font for me when I started on the Babysitters Club. Thank you, John Green. So I am very appreciative of that. I did.
Wait, this is a Gale specific font?
It is, yeah. Like basically, I wanted so deeply to hand letter all of my comics when I started making graphic novels, and they said, Gale, no, you will die. One edit and you will hate yourself. And I said, oh no, thanks, Scholastic. So yeah, when I jumped on board, I had my own beautiful font that I use to this day. And I love it because I feel that when you get the opportunity to do something at least somewhat adjacent to hand lettering, it feels more in line with your art. That's my tangent. But yeah, in terms of, coloring was K-Chap, but there also is this whole incredible production and editing team. You have my editor, Cassandra Fulton. You have the art director, Phil Falco, who's saying, okay, let's make these pages actually work in book. He's also working on my book. It was with Shivana Sukdeo and Karina Taylor on interiors and color design. Like they were all working together saying, okay, we have these ideas, but sometimes things will print differently. We're going to have to move them to make sure that you can actually read it when you're holding a physical book and it has this big gutter in the middle. Like, oh no, good Godspeed to you. Or like saying, or they're taking stuff to the marketing department saying, okay, who's going to buy this with this cover? Because Barnes & Noble has their own opinions. There are so many different people who are saying, okay, this is what the book needs to be for this specific audience, or this is a thought that we have that you, the artist, like don't have to worry about because you're on like this other side. I am still honestly continuing to learn about this industry and market every single day. And it is so deeply fascinating and such a joy that all of these people can come together and say, I want kids to read this book and figure out ways to make it happen. It's amazing.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, there's only so much a single person could know. And so like having a team like the one from Scholastic Graphics, I mean, frankly, it's like the only reason, I mean, not the only reason, but the main reason why we're talking is because somebody reached out to me from Scholastic Graphics. And like that's, I mean, honestly, like the promotional side is like a full-time job unto itself, as
Truly,
Leah well knows. And like that's just like, that's a lot. That's all of that is a lot. And having that team behind you is probably the best, if not the only way that Freestyle can be, I don't want to say as good as it is, but can reach the audience you want it to.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. Yeah. Like there are a million different ways to make comics, a million different reasons to make comics. And I feel like as a cartoonist, understanding what your own personal goals for any given story, it's the best thing you can do for yourself. For me, it was, I want to tell the best story I possibly can. And get as much help as I can doing that. And graphics was the way to go with that.
Well, Gale, I love the book. It's fantastic. By the time this goes up, other people are going to have loved the book. I wish you the best of luck on the lead up to release. And I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me about your comic book story, Freestyle, and everything else.
Thank you so much. This has been such a joy. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with cartoonist Gale Galligan. You can find them on Twitter and Instagram at RoboChai and their work in the just released graphic novel Freestyle. Big thanks to Deanna Chapman as well, who helped edit this podcast and make it sound as good as it does. Love Off Panel, want to support it? Subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts today and give the show a rating or review while you're at it, but 5 stars only. You can also support the show by backing it on Patreon. Find the show at patreon.com/offpanel. And when you back it on there, you get early access to each week's podcast as well as weekly content and more. Want even more? Subscribe to my subscription comic site, Sketched, at sketch.com for long-form articles interviews, and the rest of the site's content. You can find Off Panel and Sketched on social media by following on Twitter and Instagram at @SketchComic or following me at @SliceFriedGold. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including Johnny Cannon, Chris Doré, Near Levy, Dennis Hoffman, Jason Hussa, Cancel Comics, Kieran Gillen, Jonathan Kenguratam, Henry Johnson, Django Boren, James Tynan IV, Chris Langford, Jason Wood, Tom Peachy, Ben Damstead, Rom V, Devin Fitzsimons, Nick Walker, Patrick Coyle, Isaac Warren, Scott Carpenter, Rent Narb Studios Comics, Nicholas Palmieri, Capes and Tights Podcast, Klaus Vandeven, Brian, Submed Industries, Raj Patel, Jack Mulqueen, Kyle, Carl Kerschel, Robert Masella, Elza Chartier, Luke Nakashoji, Elliot Metz, Dr. Luke, Scott Hazelwood, Scott Bawan, Michael Tunk, Canadian by Proxy, Bradley Rader, Carl Choi, Brandon Pillis, Patrick Brower, Declan Shalvey, Dan Garino, Josh Williamson, Adam Freeman, Ben Wild, Brian Klein Q, SB, Nick Bennett, Daniel Whitfield, Susanna Polo, Reed Hinkley Barnes, Mario Tiambang, AbductedTheComic.com, Andrew Carita, Matt Mahoney, Charlie Chu, Stephen Hall, Pensacola Pop Comics, Kim Eslin, Philip Myra, Christian Sheldon, Kenny Porter, Chris Pachalo, Torrin Groenbeck, Fuzz Bubbles, Christopher Todd, Transmitter Down, Waltz Comics and Books, Carl Mizell, Danny Ollie, Paul Salates, Akil Wilson, Alex Dimitriopoulos, Terry Dodson, Wesley Gift, Sean Kirkham, Alistair Ross, Julio Anta, Brett A. Schmidt, Jason Goodmanson, Paul Reinwald, Vita Ayala, Dave Slusher, WMQ Comics, Akil Kokachi, Sean Pinnell, Ken Heidelman, Philip Seavey, Al Ewing, David Kelly, Rob Wilson IV, Nick Polito, Brendan Fletcher, Jonathan Nilsson, Jason Massey, Adam Bogart, Matthew Taylor, Nick Patera, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, David Baraldi, Nick Hall, Bjorn Basin, John Hendricks, Steve Anderson, Ian Maxfield, Cliff Chang, Colin McMahon, Chris Palmer, Scott McGovern, Nathan Fairbairn, Kat McKenzie, Adam Highfield, Fiona Staples, Mark Abnett, Mike Murphy, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim Demonakos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics and Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. A quick thanks to Upright T-Rex Music, who wrote and performed Panel's theme song just for the show. Check out their music on Spotify because it's completely delightful. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.